Chapter 1502 Awakening in Bondage. Chapter 1502 Awakening in Bondage. Author's note. Unedited chapter. Angie slowly regained consciousness. Her eyes fluttered open to an unfamiliar sight. She was in a cold facility, where the walls lined with a dull metallic sheen and harsh clinical lights that reflected off the surfaces. There were ability dampeners spread across the walls. The air was thick with the buzz of machinery and the low murmur of voices. Before her was a transparent glass wall, beyond which lay another room. Her heart sank as she saw Gustav there, restrained and unconscious. His body was marked with dark, sinuous lines that seemed to pulse and move across his skin. Panic surged through her as she tried to move, only to find herself similarly restrained. Glowing cuffs bound her wrists and ankles, rendering her unable to harness any of her powers. She pulled against them, but it was futile. "Gustav," she whispered with her voice trembling in fear and desperation. In the hallway outside her cell, she noticed several MBO higher-ups and scientists. They were conversing in low tones, occasionally glancing in her direction. The atmosphere was tense and filled with an air of impending judgment. "Hey," Angie called out, her voice stronger now. "What's going on? Why am I restrained? Let me out of here." One of the higher-ups, a tall man with silver hair and a stern expression, turned to face her. His eyes were cold and devoid of empathy. "You're still undergoing observation," he said flatly. "We need to ensure you're no longer a threat." Angie's eyes blazed with fury. "And what about Gustav? What are you doing to him?" The man's gaze shifted to Gustav's unconscious form, then back to Angie. "He will undergo trials for his crimes against humanity and the universe at large." A surge of anger and despair overwhelmed Angie. "No, you don't understand. He's not guilty of anything. You can't do this to him." The higher-up's expression remained unchanged. His actions speak for themselves. The evidence is overwhelming. Angie struggled against her restraints, her frustration mounting. "You're wrong. You have to listen to me. Let me stand trial instead." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. The scientists continued their discussions, seemingly indifferent to her cries. In her desperation, Angie focused on Gustav. She pulled against the cuffs with all her might, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't break free. "Please, you have to let him go." Her voice broke, tears welling in her eyes. "This is all my fault." The higher-up turned away, dismissing her words as inconsequential. Angie's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the gravity of their situation. Everything that had happened played in her mind, and she realized just how much of a mess she had made. She feared for what might happen to Gustav if these people had their way. Angie's eyes darted around the room, searching for any means of escape. She couldn't think of anything that didn't require her bloodline abilities. "You cowards! You only want to place blames on him for your selfish interests, don't you?" Angie's voice rang out. The higher-ups turned to face her with straight looks. "Gustav Crimson is responsible for the destruction of planet Ozius. He has caused numerous damage across the cosmos since then, escaping the pursuit of the MBO, destroying ships, abducting children of alien races, and so many others." The one who had spoke before voiced once more, "That is a very big lie. Gustav didn't destroy planet Ozius. I was present there, and am sure you everything else you bastards are pinning on him are false." Angie cried out with an enraged look, "Whatever you think is not our problem." As the heated back and forth between Angie and the higher-ups intensified, the air in the facility grew thick with tension. Angie's words fell on deaf ears, as the higher-ups remained resolute in their decision to keep her restrained and to put Gustav on trial. The scientists, too, seemed indifferent to her cries, focused on their data and instruments. Just then, the doors to the hallway swung open with a loud creak, and an imposing figure stepped into the room. The presence of Jack, the most powerful mixed blood, cast a long shadow over the proceedings. His towering form and the raw aura emanating from him commanded immediate attention and respect. The higher-ups and scientists turned their heads in unison, their expressions shifting from stern determination to wary caution. "I made a promise to Gustav," Jack announced with his voice resonating through the room. "Angie is in my care." The higher-ups exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a woman with sharp features and steely eyes, stepped forward. "Jack, you know how proceedings work. We cannot simply release her. Observations need to be completed first." Jack's eyes, filled with the pride of strength, bore into her. He was usually more overlooking and followed orders to the latter, but he was also something who stuck to his word. "Gustav has done more to protect this world than most of you realize. Anyways, as I have stated, Angie is in my care. I am more than capable of making sure she poses no more threat." Angie, still restrained, looked at Jack with a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Jack, what will happen to Gustav?" she asked in a trembling tone. Jack's gaze softened as he turned to her. "I'm not sure, Angie, but I promise you this. I will do my best to help him. If he truly isn't guilty of these charges, I will make sure he is set free." One of the higher-ups, an older man with graying hair and a stern expression, stepped forward. "Jack, are you betraying humanity by siding with them?" he voiced in suspicion. Jack's eyes narrowed as a palpable wave of power rippled through the room. "Betraying humanity? No, I am ensuring that true justice is served. I will make sure that everything is done fairly, and that no one is condemned without a proper trial." The scientists who had been silently observing now shifted uneasily. One of them, a young woman with auburn hair, spoke up. "But the data we have, it points to significant anomalies. We can't ignore that." Jack turned his attention to her with an unreadable expression. "You can hold on to Gustav for a bit, but she will be coming with me." Angie's eyes were filled with tears, both of relief and lingering fear. "Jack, please, you have to save him. He doesn't deserve this." Jack nodded. "I understand, Angie, but for now you need to stay strong. We will wait till he regains consciousness." The higher-ups seemed to be at an impasse. The woman's steely eyes met Jack's unwavering gaze. "We cannot simply hand over jurisdiction because of your promise. Protocol must be followed." Jack's presence seemed to grow even more formidable as the very air crackled with his energy. "Angie is under my protection, and I will oversee her care." The higher-ups exchanged worried looks. They knew challenging Jack outright could lead to dire consequences. The graying man spoke again, his tone more conciliatory. "Jack, we understand your position, but there must be a way to balance this without undermining the authority of the MBO." Jack took a deep breath, visibly calming himself. "All I ask is for fairness. Angie has been freed of the dark control. I witnessed it happen. Will the MBO not take my word for it? She has already been put through enough, and any further sequence would be a travesty of justice. I stand for justice regardless of the situation." The scientists began to whisper among themselves, their uncertainty evident. The auburn-haired woman stepped forward again. "What about the dark energy? Gustav has absorbed everything. She is free. He is the only one that I will allow you observe." Jack glanced at Gustav as the dark marks writhing across his unconscious form. "We need to understand how it affects him. He can be monitored until then, but not mistreated." The higher-ups huddled together, their voices low but urgent. After a tense few moments, the steely-eyed woman turned back to Jack. "We will agree to your terms, Jack. Angie will be placed under your care, and we will ensure that Gustav receives a fair trial, but we will not tolerate any further interference." Jack nodded as the tension in the room eased slightly. "That's all I ask." The restraints on Angie began to loosen, and she was finally freed. She rubbed her wrists with a slightly relieved expression. "Thank you, Jack." Jack placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's all right. You should probably get a good look at him now before you go. I doubt they will let you visit after this." The higher-ups and scientists slowly dispersed after Jack asked for a moment of privacy. As the room emptied, Jack and Angie stood by Gustav's side. Angie had a face full of emotions as she stared at him. "This is all my fault." Tears streaked down her cheeks as she reached out to touch Gustav's face. Chapter 15:03 The Modified Narrative. Chapter 15:03 The Modified Narrative Author's Note. Unedited chapter. Gustav's consciousness drifted through a void of endless darkness. The inky blackness seemed to stretch on forever, punctuated only by a chilling silence that made him feel profoundly alone. His thoughts were interrupted by a sinister voice that echoed through the emptiness. Its tone was dripping with malice and mockery. "So, this is the grand outworldly, reduced to floating in the abyss," the voice sneered. "How foolish the action you took was, Gustav." Gustav's eyes narrowed in the darkness. He had felt this presence ever since he assimilated Angie's form of darkness. It was a part of him now, but it wasn't welcome. "You're delusional if you think you can take control," Gustav retorted coolly. "I will assimilate you, dominate you. It's only a matter of time." A cold, mirthless laugh echoed through the void. "You think you can dominate the darkness that has existed since the beginning of time? Impossible. Even for you. If I had a cent for every time someone told me something was impossible, I'd be a billionaire," Gustav stated with an unfettered tone. The voice seemed to shift, as if circling him like a predator. "Why waste your time protecting beings from a plane that has branded you a universal fugitive?" Gustav laughed in defiance. "I'm not doing it for them. I do it for my loved ones." "Ah, your loved ones," the voice mused with its tone dripping with sarcasm. "So if your loved ones were eliminated, you would stop being a protector?" A surge of killing intent erupted from Gustav the moment he heard that. "I'll advise you to watch what you say, because it could be the last thing you ever say." The sinister voice laughed again, this time with genuine amusement. "I have my answer. Your loved ones are your weakness." The surroundings in the physical world began to tremble. The containment facility shook, causing the scientists and MBO officers to struggle for breath. Angie, who was standing before him, felt the oppressive weight of Gustav's killing intent pressing down on her. She watched in horror as the facility seemed to buckle under the immense pressure. "What is going on?" All scientists fell to their knees, choking as the oppressiveness swept across the region. Meanwhile, back in the void, the voice vanished, leaving Gustav alone with his thoughts. The oppressive atmosphere lingered briefly before finally calming. In the physical realm, Jack stood before the scientists and MBO officers who had rushed back to the enclosure after the killing intent reduced. "Whatever is happening to him, it's causing this instability." One of the scientists stepped forward. "Even his killing intent is powerful enough to cause death. We need to understand the nature of this dark energy. If we can isolate it, we might be able to stabilize him. He's fighting something terrible inside him. I couldn't win, but I believe he is stronger." "I will help however I can," Angie voiced from the side. Gustav's consciousness drifted into a meditative state, seeking to quell the unprecedented altercation of darkness spreading from the root of his core. The sinister voice that had taunted him earlier was a distant echo now. With every breath, Gustav focused on centering himself, drawing strength from the depths of his being. Meanwhile, Eldris, Falco, EE, and Endrick finally arrived at the location of the Alliance. The structure, shaped like a syringe, floated ominously in the vastness of space. At first, it seemed tiny, almost insignificant against the display of distant stars. But as their spacecraft drew closer, the structure began to expand, revealing its true size. White spatial lights cascaded down like a waterfall, bathing the surroundings in an ethereal glow. "This place is massive," Falco muttered, his eyes wide with awe. "I agree, but stay focused," Eldris replied with a straight gaze. "Remember the plan." Their spacecraft approached the lights, and as it passed through, the scene before them transformed. They appeared inside a vast, bustling hub filled with Alliance Corp members moving about with purpose. This vicinity didn't look like it had ceilings. The top was a view of space with glistening stars twinkling and distant galaxies. Protocols were being meticulously followed, with spacecraft coming in and out, each one undergoing thorough checks. "Identification, please," a stern-faced officer demanded to the Corp members ahead of the four. "We need to provide that rhombus-cubed identification," Eldris said through their mind comms while glancing at the others. They had prepared for this, and each had a particular high-grade technological device in their possession, but the rhombus-shaped cube was still missing. EE created miniature vortexes to discreetly consume the identification cubes from some unsuspecting Corp members who had just gone in. He handed the cubes to the rest of the group just as it was their turn. Time mirage. Endrick's index finger glowed as he twirled it slightly. Replicas of the identification cubes EE had stolen appeared in the possession of the Corp members he had taken them from. This way, they wouldn't know they fakes until the time limit of the ability was reached. Hopefully the group would be done with their business here by then. Although these cubes were specifically for personal identification data, the specialty of the secret tech in their possession would rewrite the data in the cube and tailor-make it to become theirs so they can appear on the Alliance Corp database. Another stern-faced officer approached them, scanning their faces with suspicion. "Identification, please." Eldris, Falco, EE, and Endrick presented their cubes with ease. The officer scanned each one, his gaze lingering on them for what felt like an eternity. The seconds stretched, and tension slowly began to build. "Welcome," the officer finally said, stepping aside. "Proceed." They reached a particular distance before exhaling collectively. "That was close," Endrick whispered. "Let's keep moving," Eldris urged while taking the lead. They followed the necessary proceedings, blending in with the other Corp members. Each step they took felt like walking a tightrope. The threat of discovery was ever present. The interior of the Alliance structure was a maze of corridors and chambers, each one more imposing than the last. The place where Alliance leaders held their meetings was at the far east, while the Alliance gatherings were held in a different position. The sights here were marvelous beyond words. It was like an extremely modern city floating in deep space. "We need to find out where they're holding Rhea," Falco said while his eyes scanned the area. Dietrich said cell block Delt 7. "We need to find out where prisoners are kept first," Eldris chipped in. As they navigated through the Alliance, they encountered several checkpoints. At each one, they presented their stolen identification cubes, maintaining their cover. At one point, they nearly stumbled. A particularly vigilant officer scrutinized their identifications, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. He asked a series of probing questions, and for a moment, it seemed their cover was about to be blown. "Where were you stationed before this?" the officer demanded, his gaze sharp. "Sector 14, under Commander Vexus," Eldris replied, smoothly with a steady tone. The officer's eyes flicked between them, weighing their words. The silence stretched, each second a heartbeat. "Very well," he said finally, stepping aside. "Proceed." They moved forward as the tension eased slightly. Every step felt like a gamble, but they pressed on, driven by the need to rescue Rhea. Eldris had overheard some Corp members discussing, and the name Commander Vexus came up. To save their cover, he had to use it. Finally, they reached a more secluded part of the complex, a section that seemed less frequented by the bustling Corp members. There were rectangular-shaped structures that looked like pillars reaching the very top. The rectangular-shaped structures were lined in rows, and one could move in between them. He glanced around as his eyes narrowed. This looks like it might be the right place. Yeah, but this is Block A. I think we still need to move further in, Falco responded with narrowed eyes. Across the earth, news outlets were abuzz with breaking news. Gustav Crimson, the planet destroyer, had been captured. Headlines flashed across screens, and newscasters spoke with barely concealed excitement. Gustav Crimson, the most wanted fugitive in the universe, has finally been apprehended, one reporter announced, her tone triumphant. Thanks to the efforts of Jack, the most powerful mixed blood, the threat has been neutralized as images of Gustav, restrained and in a darkened state, filled the screens. The narrative was clear. Gustav was the villain, and Jack was the hero. The masses, unaware of the true events that had unfolded, cheered the news. Their fear of Gustav's power had clouded their judgment. Meanwhile, in a quieter part of Plankton City, a far different story was unfolding. Angie, now fully human and free of the darkness that had consumed her, stood before a door. Her heart raced as she approached the door with her hands trembling in anticipation. Her parents hadn't seen her in over a year. She wondered how they would react, if they had moved on with their lives completely, or if she even still had a place here, for worrying them all this time. Chapter 15. O for the Beatdown. Chapter 15. O for the Beatdown author's note. Unedited chapter, she decided to throw all of these thoughts to the back of her mind and proceeded to knock softly. Calm, calm, calm. Her heart was in her throat as she waited. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing her mother. A look of shock and disbelief appeared on her slightly wrinkled face with visible eye bags. Angie, her mother whispered as tears welled up in her eyes. Mom, Angie replied, as her voice slowly broke down. It's me. I'm home. Her mother let out a sob, immediately pulling Angie into a tight embrace. Oh, my baby. Mr. Villandrobadia appeared behind her mother with an expression of both shock and overwhelming relief. Angie, he repeated with an emotional tone. Is it really you? Angie nodded with tears streaming down her face. I'm home, Dad. I'm really home. They enveloped her in their arms, holding her as if they would never let go. The numerous months of worry, fear, and uncertainty melted away in that moment of reunion, replaced by the warmth of their love. We never gave up hope, her mother said with a trembling tone. Every day, we prayed that you one day find your way back to us. I'm sorry, Angie whispered, her voice filled with guilt. I'm so sorry for putting you and Dad through so much worry. Her mother cupped her face while looking into her eyes. You have nothing to apologize for. Angie, we know it wasn't your fault. The important thing is that you're back with us now, Angie's father said with a soft tone. They guided her inside, leading her to the living room, where she sank into the familiar comfort of the couch. Her parents sat on either side of her, their hands never leaving hers, as if they needed the physical connection to believe she was truly there. Where have you been all this time? Her father asked gently. It's a long story, Angie replied with a disturbed look. I was trapped somewhere for a very long time. I didn't know if I'd ever see you again. Her mother squeezed her hand with tears streaming down her face. We're just so grateful that you're safe now. As they talked, the holographic television in the background continued to broadcast the news of Gustav's capture. Angie glanced at the screen, and her heart ached as she spotted this. She knew the truth of what had happened, the sacrifices Gustav had made. Seeing him painted as a villain was a bitter pill to swallow. Mom, Dad, she began with a steady voice. There's something I need to tell you about Gustav. He's not what they say he is. Her parents exchanged a worried glance, but nodded for her to continue. Gustav, he saved me, she revealed with a firm tone. He never stopped trying even when it seemed impossible. He sacrificed himself to make sure I could come back to you. Her father frowned with his brow furrowing. But the news, they say he's responsible for what happened at Aesop. For the destruction of the planet, and your disappearance as well. Angie shook her head vehemently. They're wrong. Gustav fought to protect everyone. If anything, he should be getting praised, because no one would have returned if it wasn't for him. He doesn't deserve what's happening to him. Her mother's face displayed a look of realization as she recalled what happened at their last encounter. We didn't treat him so well the last time, even when he promised to save you, she muttered with a remorseful look. He deserves an apology. Even after everything that had been thrown at him, he still stuck to his word and saved you. Mr. Villandrobadia was equally as remorseful. Everyone really painted the narrative a different way, when he is in fact a savior. I just wish there was a way to make everyone see the truth. Well, do whatever we can to help, Angie, her father said with a thoughtful gaze while placing a hand on her shoulder. They wanted to hear more on exactly all of Angie's experiences, but she wasn't interested in giving them full details. She didn't want to cause more panic than necessary. How could she ever let her parents know that they were up against a literal being that could swallow up the face of this plane's existence? Where is Phil? Angie asked of her little brother. He is in school, Angie's mother answered. It's been too long. He must have grown bigger by now. A smile appeared on Angie's face as she thought of her brother. He has. But before he returns, there is something you should know. Phil has been. In the bustling courtyard of Echelon High School, students milled about during their lunch break. The school, which was a blend of high-grade architecture and lush greenery, boasted spacious grounds and state-of-the-art facilities. Large trees provided shade over neatly manicured lawns, while pathways lined with flowers wound between buildings. This was the exact high school Gustav had graduated from about 4 years back. A tall and striking young man with silver hair and a unicorn-like horn protruding from his forehead stood near a group of his friends. Despite being only 16 and in his second year, his 6-foot-tall frame and slightly muscular build made him stand out. Hey, Phil, a sneering voice called out. Phil turned to see Marcus, a year 3 senior, swaggering towards him with a group of cronies. Marcus was infamous for his bullying, using his bloodline abilities to intimidate others. Today, his target was the infamous Phil of Echelon High. It would seem that he didn't care about the scary rumors he had heard about Phil. Your sister, Angie, she's Gustav's whore, isn't she? Marcus jeered, drawing the attention of the surrounding students. Phil's eyes narrowed as a surge of anger immediately flooded through him. Take that back, Marcus. Marcus laughed, enjoying the reaction. Why should I? Everyone knows Gustav's been captured, and your sister has been gone for ages. What does that say about her? The students around them murmured, watching the confrontation with growing interest. Among them, several girls couldn't help but admire Phil. He was said to be fiery and bold. Now, they were seeing it in person. Shut up, Phil shouted while his horn began to glow with a silver light. You don't know anything about my sister. Oh, I know plenty, Marcus taunted. I know she's probably dead, or worse because she dated that fugitive. You're just as pathetic as she is. The insult pushed Phil over the edge. His body began to shift, muscles bulging, and silver fur sprouting all over his skin. His horn lengthened and sharpened, and his eyes took on a feral gleam. Get ready to eat your words, Phil growled, his voice now a deep rumbling snarl. Marcus' cronies stepped back, sensing the imminent fight. Marcus, however, grinned and raised his hands. Sheets of paper materialized around him, swirling in the air before forming into tightly controlled bombs. You think you can take me on, Beast Boy? Marcus sneered. Without another word, Phil charged. With his transformation complete, he was now a large beast covered in shimmering silver fur. His horn crackled with energy as he moved with surprising speed for his size, closing the distance between them in an instant. Marcus hurled a volley of paper bombs at Phil, each one exploding with a deafening bang. Phil roared in pain as the blast tore into his fur and skin, sending him flying across the air. Phil rammed into a tree, but didn't stay down for a single second before charging forward again. "Oh, that didn't take you down." "Hey, race more," Marcus voiced while swiping his fingers forward continuously. Boom, boom, boom. Controlled explosions with a tiny range, but very effective damage rang out across the place. However, it looked like Phil had suddenly developed some kind of tolerance as he kept pushing further despite getting hit with these powerful blasts. Impossible! He should have lost a limb by now. Marcus couldn't believe his eyes as he cranked up the explosions. He hadn't heard of Phil's ferocity. Phil's powerful legs propelled him forward, and he lashed out with a swipe of his massive clawed hand. Marcus barely managed to dodge, the claws grazing his arm and leaving deep gashes. Blood spattered the ground, and Marcus' grin faltered. "You're going to regret that," Marcus hissed, launching more paper bombs. Phil's horn glowed brighter, and he shot a beam of silver energy from its tip. The beam cut through the air, intercepting the paper bombs and causing them to explode prematurely. The force of the explosions pushed Marcus back, and he stumbled, his control wavering. Phil seized the opportunity, leaping into the air and descending hard on Marcus. His claws raked across Marcus' chest, and he followed up with a powerful headbutt as his horn cracked against Marcus' skull. Marcus cried out in pain as a long bloody line appeared on his head, but he wasn't done yet. With a desperate effort, he summoned a massive sheet of paper and wrapped it around Phil, trying to suffocate him. Phil roared, thrashing wildly with his claws tearing at the paper. Chapter 15:05 Phil's Newfound Conviction. Chapter 15:05 Phil's Newfound Conviction. Author's note. Unedited chapter. The students watching from the sidelines gasped, their admiration for Phil growing as they witnessed this. I've heard of how he beats boys older than him up, but I've never witnessed it. He is so hot. Several girls whispered excitedly to each other, their crushes on him solidifying as they watched him fight. Phil's rage and strength peaked, and he shredded the paper cocoon. With a final, ferocious roar, he lunged at the battered Marcus, pinning him to the ground. His claws dug into Marcus' shoulders, and he bared his teeth in a snarl. "Apologize," Phil growled, his voice barely human. "Take back what you said about my sister." Bloodied and beaten, Marcus looked up at Phil with fear in his eyes. Okay, I take it back. I'm sorry." Phil hesitated for a moment while letting out heavy breaths. Then, with a final growl, he released Marcus and stepped back. His form slowly returned to normal. His silver fur receded, and his horn returned to its usual size. Marcus lay on the ground, clutching his wounds and glaring up at Phil. "You'll pay for this," he spat, but his voice lacked the conviction it had before. Phil ignored him, turning away and walking towards the edge of the courtyard. The students parted to let him through. Their faces were filled with respect. Among them, several girls watched him go, while some approached, but he completely ignored them with a disinterested look. "This is all your fault, Gustav," Phil roared in his mind as he walked away. He didn't mind the injuries on his body as well. He moved to a secluded location and sat with a pensive look of sadness. "Big sister, just where are you?" He had no idea that Angie had returned. Back at the courtyard, teachers arrived, dispersing the crowd and tending to Marcus' injuries. The whole school would soon hear about the fight, but Phil didn't care. Phil sat in the principal's office, his hands clenched into fists on his lap. Principal McGregor, an older man with thinning gray hair and a stern expression, peered at him over the rim of his glasses. The office was adorned with awards and certificates. It had an air of authority that made students uncomfortable. "Phil, fighting on school grounds is strictly prohibited unless during monitored trainings," Principal McGregor said with a firm tone. Phil took a deep breath, trying to steady his anger. Marcus was talking trash about my sister. He called her Gustav's whore and said she was probably dead because of him. Principal McGregor's expression softened slightly, but remained resolute. I understand that you were upset, Phil, but you should have reported the incident to a teacher. Pfft, reported? Like y'all don't lick the asses of his father. Y'all won't do shit. So I took matters into my own hands. Phil, anger burst through like a dam. Watch your tone, young man, Principal McGregor voiced as his smile vanished. Tisich, Phil folded his arms and tried to calm himself. Resorting to violence only escalates the situation. As it stands, you will have to face the consequences of your actions, Principal McGregor stated. Phil's shoulders slumped in defeat. What kind of punishment? You will serve a week with manual workers and write a formal apology to Marcus, Principal McGregor stated. Furthermore, you will be required to attend anger management sessions. Phil nodded, knowing there was no point in arguing. Is that all? The principal gave a curt nod. You're dismissed. Make sure you think about your actions and how to handle such situations better in the future. Phil left the office without uttering another word. The day had been exhausting, and all he wanted was to go home. As he exited the school building and headed to the hoverbus stop, he couldn't shake off his frustration. Phil boarded an hoverbus and found an empty seat by the window. The streets were filled with people, hover cars, and various advertisements on large digital screens, as usual. As the bus glided smoothly through the city, Phil's eyes were drawn to one of the giant screens displaying breaking news. Gustav's face appeared on the screen, and a news anchor's voice echoed through the bus. Gustav, the infamous fugitive, has been captured and is currently being held at a high-security facility. Authorities praised Jack for the successful capture, and citizens are urged to remain vigilant. Phil's already knew of the news, but his jaw tightened and his fists clenched again. This is all because of you, Gustav, he muttered under his breath. If it weren't for you, Angie wouldn't have disappeared. The bus continued its journey, and Phil tried to push the thoughts away. As he neared his neighborhood, he thought of Angie once more and sighed. He stepped off the bus and walked down the familiar streets, lost in his thoughts. When he turned the corner onto his street, he saw a figure standing near their house. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized the silhouette. Angie stood there with her long silver and pink hair blowing gently in the breeze. He had never seen it get this long because Angie was fond of cutting it, which made it harder for him to believe his eyes. Big sister. Phil's voice cracked as he called out her name. Angie's face lit up with a smile, and she rushed towards him. Phil. Phil ran to her, and they embraced tightly, both overwhelmed with emotion. Tears gathered in Phil's eyes as he held his sister in joy and disbelief. I thought I'd never see you again, Phil whispered. Angie held him tighter with a slightly surprised expression due to his height. I'm here now, Phil. I'm back. They pulled back slightly, and Phil looked at her with a mixture of awe and confusion. What happened? Where have you been all this time? Angie took a deep breath. It's a long story, Phil. Let's go inside. They walked into the house, and Phil's heart felt lighter than it had in months. Inside, their parents were gladdened that the whole family was back together again. After the initial excitement settled, Angie noticed the injuries on Phil's cheeks that hadn't healed and asked him what happened. Got into a fight, Phil answered bluntly. Angie placed a hand on his shoulder. Yeah, you gotta stop doing that. Mom and Dad told me everything. Phi looked a bit embarrassed as he turned to stare at his parents sitting at a corner. His eyes screamed, Why did you tell her? It turned out that Phil had been getting into a lot of fights since his sister disappeared, and Gustav was branded a fugitive. Everyone was well aware that his sister was dating Angie, so a lot of times they came up with false and insulting narratives to poke at him. Phil's mood had turned terrible after the loss of Angie. He had a very bad temper and dealt with everything using his fists. He even sometimes got into scuffles in the neighborhood, and with his parents sometimes. If you're looking for remorse, you won't find one here. I don't regret beating all those people up, Phil folded his arms in defiance. When did you get so cheeky? Angie pulled Hugh's cheeks, finding his expression adorable. Ouch! Phil rubbed his cheeks with a pout. I'm not asking you to be remorseful, just learn to control your anger. You don't need to be physical all the time. On a side note, thank you for standing up for me. Angie displayed a sweet smile. Reminds me of Gustav. This is exactly how hot-headed he was back then. Angie chuckled slightly as she added, Don't compare me to that fugitive. Phil jumped up in anguish. Isn't he the reason you disappeared in the first place? He added. Angie sat Phil down with a pull and decided to give him a brief explanation of what had happened. She left out a lot of things, but gave him the same level of information that her parents received, so as not to cause too much panic. Gustav, he saved me. He risked everything to bring me back and free me from the control, Angie said with an emotional look. Phil's face fell in guilt. So, Gustav isn't the villain everyone thinks he is. Angie shook her head. No, he isn't. He's been branded a fugitive because people don't understand. The government and media is controlling the narrative. Phil sat back, processing everything. I can't believe it. I blamed him for your disappearance. Even the fight at school today was because they insulted you using Gustav. I am trying to get the charges off him and change the narrative. After all he has done, the world shouldn't be against him. Angie leaned back with a sigh. Phil nodded in understanding and newfound determination eyes. I will. I'll do whatever it takes to help him. Within a dark space, Gustav's consciousness floated with closed eyes. After this isolation, I should be able to contact someone in the outside world. I need to be quick or it will be too late to save them. Chapter 1506, Ethereal Impossibility. Chapter 1506, Ethereal Impossibility, author's note. Do not unlock, just do it, Stark mumbled. Memory siphoning has been activated. As Gustav activated the ability, a rush of images and sensations flooded through him. The first memory was Stark touching the ancient pamphlet, his fingers trembling as he made contact. Instantly, a deluge of visions cascaded into Stark's consciousness, visions now shared with Gustav. The scenes were chaotic and intense. Gustav, riding the warp demolator, unwittingly triggers a cataclysmic event. With the warp demolator instability, which somewhat had something to do with Gustav's involvement in its movement, a fragmented trails of ashiness breaks off from the pile and ends up appearing on Earth. The Vertigan premises, to be exact. A corruption is unleashed, enveloping everything in its path. Gustav finds himself ensnared in the location he ends up after riding the ARP demolator, unable to escape and come give assistance as disaster unfolds. The Vertigan Island is on fire. In order to stop the corruption from spreading further, the world comes together to wipe them out. The lineage of the Vertigan family, once proud and influential, withers in the blaze, their legacy reduced to ashes. A fragment of another memory shows a later scene. A devastated Gustav, his face etched with defeat and sorrow, carrying the lifeless body of Stark through the remnants of what was once a vibrant island. The weight of his failure, the destruction of a family he inadvertently caused, hangs heavily on him. Gustav pulls away from Stark at this moment with a look of distress as his mind returns to the present. So it's true. I told you. I needed you to see it, to understand why I did what I did. I couldn't let that future come to pass. Stark breathed profusely while trying to recover from the siphon's toll. Gustav stood in place with a contemplative look while the impact of the visions still toiled through his mind. While I get it, I can't just accept that outcome. There must be something that can be done to change it. That's one of the reasons I brought you here, away from the demolator. Not just to protect my family, but to give us a chance to find another way. Together. I understand. It is paramount for you to get to where the warp demolator is heading, Stark voiced with a hopeful tone. And if we can't find another way, what then? We sacrifice everything and everyone else just to save your family? Gustav questioned with a tinge of annoyance. If it was you, what would you have done? Stark asked while lowering his head. This question caused a brief silence as Gustav pictured choosing between saving his loved ones and saving the world. Let's not pretend that you wouldn't fuck the world over to save your friends. The system chipped in. Whose side are you on? The side of reason. You know the meaning of that word? Did you Google it? Fuck you. Gustav decided to ignore the system and turn to face Stark. You better pray that we find another way. For everyone's sake, Gustav tone hinted at accepting the collaboration. Stark looked at Gustav, his eyes solemn, understanding the enormity of the choices before them. Thank you for giving me a chance. As the warp demolator receded into the void of space, leaving behind a trail of cosmic unrest, Endrick, Eldris, Falco, and Rhea remained aboard their spacecraft, their faces etched with concern and confusion. They had expected Gustav to appear at the last moment or something, but his absence now cast a shadow over their mission. Now, the warp demolator was gone. Rhea, staring out into the now calm space, broke the silence. Gustav, he's definitely okay, right? His voice carried a mixture of hope and worry. He has to be. Gustav survived worse, but with his disappearance, and without the warp demolator taking him to where planet Humbad remnants is located, I'm not sure what our next move should be, Eldris chipped in. Endrick then recalled the mysterious being that had intervened during their most perilous moment. The figure's glowing silhouette had prevented a disaster, but its identity remained a puzzle. Endrick, rubbing his chin thoughtfully, ventured, that being could have been Miss Amy. It reminded me of her. Rhea raised an eyebrow, skeptical. Miss Amy? Didn't she retreat to that planet she created after the ice op? Why would she appear here and in the warp demolator? Of all places, Eldris, nodding slowly, added, it surely makes no sense for it to be her, since that being appeared from the interior of the warp demolator. But then, the discussion spiraled into theories and recounts of Miss Amy's known capabilities and last known actions. Her legend, as one of the universe's most formidable beings, made her a subject of endless speculation. Falco, trying to make sense of the events, suggested, as much as it seems unlikely, who else could rip us away from the pull of something as powerful as the warp demolator? And then to dive back into it. That's not something just anyone could do, even if they were alpha ranked, and she is beyond that level of power, Eldris added. Eldris initiated the emergency thrusters, the spacecraft's engines roaring to life as they attempted to aid Endrick's telekinetic push. The combined effort caused the ship to tremble violently, straining against the immense gravitational force of the warp demolator. Thrusters at full power. Outside, the warp demolator seemed almost alive, its ashy, serpentine body writhing and expanding as it consumed the cosmic matter in its path. The spectacle was terrifying. Orbital bodies that had taken eons to form were now mere playthings in the grip of this celestial behemoth. As the spacecraft struggled to maintain its position, the crew watched helplessly as the warp demolator's path of travel became increasingly erratic. The situation aboard the spacecraft grew increasingly dire as the warp demolator's gravitational pull intensified beyond Endrick's capacity to manage. His telekinetic shield shimmered with strain, the protective energy waning as the colossal entity grew even larger, its ashy tendrils swirling menacingly closer. Endrick's face contorted with effort, and sweat beading on his brow, gritted his teeth. I can't hold it much longer. It's too strong. He didn't have this much struggle splitting an entire planet, but who knew something like this could be so difficult? Endrick wanted to make sure direct contact was not made, because none of them were aware of what effects it would bring, but as things were, it's growing. We're not going to make it if it gets much closer. Eldris announced with a tone of urgency. The crew braced themselves as the spacecraft began to shudder violently, the edges of the warp demolator's ashy trail licking the outer hull, enveloping them in darkness. It seemed as though they would be consumed whole by the cosmic phenomenon they had sought to intercept. Falco was preparing to head out there and brace the warp demolator with his bare body so as to push them from harm's way. But Eldris and Rhea were not having it. There was no way he'd be able to handle such. Suddenly, a miraculous sight unfolded. From the heart of the ashy chaos, a brilliant silver glow emerged, its radiance piercing through the darkness like a celestial beacon. An ethereal being, its form obscured by the intense luminosity it emitted, approached the spacecraft. The crew watched in awe and confusion as the glowing entity reached out with what appeared to be arms of pure light. With a graceful, powerful motion, the being pushed against the spacecraft. The force of its intervention was gentle yet firm, countering the pull of the warp demolator with a precision that seemed beyond the capabilities of any known entity. What in the universe is that? Falco couldn't hide his shock. As the being exerted its influence, the spacecraft felt the oppressive ashy grip loosening. Slowly, but with undeniable strength, the ethereal figure maneuvered them away from the belly of the warp demolator. The ash receded from the hull, revealing once again the stars beyond. The silver being, its task seemingly complete, gave one last push that sent the spacecraft into a stable path away from the destructive path of the warp demolator. As it withdrew, the glow around it pulsated warmly and almost reassuringly. A day ago, just check my memories if you think I'm lying. The visions will prove my claim. Amidst heavy breaths, Stark suggested. Gustav's grip on Stark's neck loosened as he contemplated the suggestion to delve into Stark's memories. The revelation that Stark knew about his rarely used ability to siphon memories was unsettling. This power, known to wreak havoc on the mind of the person it was used on, and it seemed Stark knew more about the existence of the outworldly than he thought. Stark's insistence and the gravity of the situation prompted Gustav's acceptance. He never spared his enemies, but he was looking for a reason to give Stark the benefit of the doubt. Gustav placed his hand firmly on Stark's temple, while Stark braced himself, closing his eyes in anticipation of the invasive probe. "This is going to hurt," Gustav stated with an emotionless tone. Chapter 1507 on site. Chapter 1507 on site. Author's note. Do not unlock some had weapons while others had activated their supernatural abilities, ready to face the group. Falco stepped forward as his body emanated a dark aura. "Like hell we will." With a wave of his hand, Falco summoned tendrils of dark energy that lashed out towards the approaching guards. The tendrils smashed into the ground, causing the floor to crack and the guards to scatter. E was already thinking ahead. "We need to find another way out. There's no way we can fight all of them head-on." Endrick nodded, his mind racing. "Follow me." "SS, honestly, it's hard to say what we'll find. Miss Amy is unpredictable, but if there's one thing I'm sure of, it's that she's continued creating life. She aims to craft a world far different from Earth's, full of diversity and harmony." Gustav responded with a reminiscent look. As they boarded the spacecraft, the bodyguards took their positions at the controls, and Gustav settled next to Stark. The bay doors slowly retracted. With a smooth surge of power, the spacecraft lifted off, leaving Earth's atmosphere in a streak of light. As they ascended, Gustav's mind drifted to his past interactions with Miss Amy. He remembered the lush landscape she had shown him, teeming with life, creatures of her own design, each species more fascinating than the last. Miss Amy stood before a sprawling vista, her hand sweeping over a field dotted with two-headed creatures grazing under a colorful sky. "Here," she had said, "I will create a sanctuary where all the life forms I create can coexist in balance. A model of what any world could be, free from strife and inequality." Gustav felt a pang of nostalgia and a deep-seated curiosity about how much her world had evolved since his last visit. He pulled himself back to the present as their ship broke free from Earth's gravitational pull and entered the open cosmos. "Space travel still amazes me every time," Stark mumbled while peering forward. With his eyes, he could see every nook and cranny of the exterior of the spacecraft. "How far until we reach Agon?" Gustav questioned. "We're looking at just over a day's journey with the current hyperdrive settings since Agon is situated at the edge of the Milky Way," Stark answered informatively. The journey through space was smooth, with the vast starlit void offering a display of serene beauty. Stark occasionally attempted to draw out more stories from Gustav, who remained somewhat reticent, lost in his thoughts. "You really respect her, don't you? Miss Amy, more than respect, Stark, I owe her my life. I was hoping I wouldn't need her help anymore until all this was over, but I guess there is no other way," Gustav voiced with a look of admiration and perturbation. As they neared Agon, the planet's image began to fill the viewport. A colossal world, its surface swirling with vibrant colors and cloud patterns that hinted at its dynamic atmosphere. "There it is, Agon," Gustav announced. "Wow, it truly is 4 times the size of Earth. Very breathtaking. To think one being could create all this. It's beyond what I thought possible." Stark couldn't imagine just how powerful Miss Amy was. Although he had very much witnessed her might at ISOP, it was an entirely different scenario to physically be in the presence of an orbital body she created. The spacecraft's approach was carefully calculated as they prepared for descent. As their spacecraft approached the vibrant, swirling atmosphere of Agon, Gustav and Stark were suddenly jolted by an unexpected resistance. A shimmering barrier, invisible until now, materialized just as their ship was about to enter the planet's orbit. Stark, startled by the sudden halt, looked over at Gustav with concern. "What's happening? Why can't we move forward?" Gustav, brow furrowed in confusion and surprise, responded, This wasn't here before. Miss Amy must have later put this in place to prevent external entry. But she should be aware of my presence by now. Why isn't she taking the barrier down?" Gustav wondered out loud. It was impossible for anything to pass Miss Amy by since she became a goddess, so Gustav expected her to have sensed their spacecraft long before it got to this point. Trying to understand the situation, Gustav instructed the ship's AI to attempt a gentle push forward, but the barrier remained impassive, its surface repelling every advance with increasing force. "Let's not force it. We might damage the ship, or worse, trigger a countermeasure we're not prepared for." Uncle Bela watched in amazement as Gustav interacted with the newly revived NID. The artifact, long dormant and silent within the depths of the Vertigan vaults, now pulsed with a vibrant, mystical energy. "Mr. Crimson, to use Don't worry, I understand how it works." Gustav cut Uncle Bela off. He proceeded to place his palm flat against the NID, and the device responded immediately, its surface shimmering with an ethereal glow. The rhythmic pulsing seemed to sync with Gustav's own energy, creating a resonance that filled the room with a palpable sense of anticipation. Gustav's thoughts were singular. "I need to find a way to get to the remnants of Planet Humbad." He held on to this intention, willing the NID to provide a path forward. After a tense few moments, the artifact responded. A projection of shimmering letters floated in the air before them. "Planet Agon." Asterisk, asterisk, Gustav stepped back, his surprise evident. "Agon? That's the name Miss Amy calls her planet." The room fell silent as the NID powered down, its task seemingly complete. Uncle Bela, breaking the silence, confirmed what the machine had implied. "It seems that whatever you need, Gustav, is tied to planet Agon. According to our ancestors, the NID has never been wrong." Gustav, puzzled, murmured to himself, "But why there? What could possibly be on Miss Amy's planet that relates to Humbad or the warp demolator?" Miss Amy's planet was still a very new one, so it didn't make any sense to him. Stark chimed in. Remember, Miss Amy isn't just your former master. She's a creator of worlds, a manipulator of cosmic scales. There is every possibility that she has foresight of the current predicament. The idea resonated with Gustav, but he was still skeptical about it. You might be right. I guess the only way to find out is by heading there. I'll arrange for transport. Stark voiced in response, and I'll gather some supplies for your journey, Uncle Bila added. I need to find a way to send a message. An intergalactic message, Gustav requested. Days had passed since the warp demolator's appearance and subsequent disappearance, leaving Eldris, Endrick, Falco, and Rhea adrift in uncertainty. They had been scouring the coordinates and searching for any trace of Gustav, their efforts fruitless and their morale dwindling. As they prepared to set a course for a nearby planet in hopes of finding assistance, the console beeped loudly, signaling an incoming transmission that immediately drew their attention. Falco, who was closest to the console, quickly tapped to accept the transmission. The familiar face of Gustav appeared in full vibrancy. Hey, guys. The group exchanged looks of relief mixed with confusion upon his appearance. Rival. We've searched everywhere. Where did you vanish to? Rhea was the first to yell out. I'm on Earth, Gustav revealed. You're on Earth? How did you end up there? Falco voiced in shock. It's Stark's doing. It's a long story. I'll fill you in later. But I'm all right. We thought we lost you. How are you going to get back? Eldris inquired. I'm not coming back just yet. I'm actually about to head to Miss Amy's planet, Agon. This revelation prompted a round of surprised murmurs among the group. Miss Amy's planet? Why? Endrick voiced in bafflement. It's related to something called the NID, an artifact that pointed me to Agon. I think it's crucial for what comes next, since I missed the warp demolator's appearance. This might be the only way I get to planet Humbad. The group listened intently as Gustav briefly explained his encounter with the NID and its mysterious guidance. So, what do you need us to do now? Head to the Milky Way to join you? Eldris inquired. No, that won't be necessary. You're over a month away, and I can't have you trailing behind that long. Instead, I need you to fix up my ship. I believe by the time you're heading back, I would have gotten what I need. Okay, we could help with other things while you do what needs to be done, Endrick answered with a nod. Thanks. I'll keep you posted on my progress and what I find out on Agon. As the transmission faded, the crew sat back, processing the flurry of information. Gustav was safe, but the journey ahead was his alone to tread for now. They turned their attention to the task at hand, repairing Gustav's spacecraft and finding their way back without mishaps. We are going to head for Earth afterwards, right? Rhea asked. You bet we are. Gustav and Stark stood in the dimly lit hangar, their spacecraft prepped and ready for departure. The air thrummed with the low rumble of the engines warming up, a subtle vibration underfoot that spoke of the power at their disposal. Beside them, two bodyguards in silver robes, their features obscured by the high collars and hoods, stood silent and alert. Gustav checking over his own disguise. A similar silver robe that masked his identity nodded to Stark. It's time to go. Although Gustav didn't shapeshift due to the number seeing Stark off, he wouldn't shy out of it when the time came. Stark, adjusting his own gear, looked at Gustav with a mix of excitement and apprehension. What should I expect out there, Gustav? It's not every day one travels to a planet crafted by a goddess. Chapter 1508 ONS. Chapter 1508 ONS Author's Note. Do not unlock Falco's staggerback as his vision plunged into darkness. Falco! Endrick shouted while extending his hand to use telekinesis. He attempted to hurl Axaroth away, but his power rebounded off the Alliance leader. Ineffective. Axaroth smirked. not even needing to move, as he sent a forceful wave that smashed into Endrick, launching him across the room and into a wall with a sickening thud. Eldris transformed the environment into a kaleidoscope of shifting colors. He attempted to trap Axaroth in a prism of vibrant hues, a prison of light and color meant to immobilize. "You're not invincible, Axaroth," he declared. Axaroth merely chuckled, his multiple limbs flexing as he shattered the colorful prison with ease. "Pathetic," he growled while sprinting forward. He grabbing Eldris by the head and slammed him into the ground before he could react. The impact reverberated through the entire alliance, causing its very foundation in space to tremble. Meanwhile, EE had been struggling to open vortexes in the right places. Come on," he muttered as sweat gathered around his brow. Vortexes would appear in places that he didn't intend to open them in. The spatial disruption in the surroundings was no joke. As Axaroth turned his attention to him, EE succeeded in creating a vortex that materialized from within one of Axaroth's right leg. Half of Axaroth's right leg was immediately consumed. Axaroth's roar of pain and fury echoed through the hall. "You'll pay for that, child," he bellowed as blood jetted out from his severed limb. He surged forward as his remaining limbs propelled him with terrifying speed toward EB, who began jumping from vortex to evade. Falco, despite his blindness, tried to help. He lashed out with whips of dark energy, each strike vicious and wild. "I am not done," he screamed with pain. The dark energy ripped through the air, severing Alliance Corps members in two with their screams, mingling in the chaos. Falco was still holding back, so as not to put the others in danger, and right now more than ever he couldn't go all out. Axaroth blocked the dark energy with his limbs as his focus split. He aimed to finish off Falco, but Endrick and EE combined their efforts to prevent him. Endrick used his telekinesis to hurl debris and create barriers, while EE managed to create vortexes to redirect Axaroth's attacks. The battle raged on. The room was filled with the sounds of clashing powers and anguished cries. Axaroth's strength seemed insurmountable as he brutalized the group with devastating strikes. He caught Endrick with a powerful blow, sending him sprawling to the ground, blood pouring from a deep gash on his side. Eldris became barely conscious as he tried to summon his strength to help, but was crushed under the weight of Axaroth's relentless assault. Falco, body trembling from blood loss and pain, continued to whip his dark energy in desperate arcs. But none of the attacks missed Axaroth, since Falco couldn't exactly aim well with missing eyes. Fortunately, two more of Axaroth's arms were sliced off, but not before he grabbed a Falco's throat to end him. "You've lost," Axaroth hissed in pain, while tightening his grip. Seeing Falco in mortal danger, unleashed a vortex from Axaroth's waist, severing the powerful Alliance leader in two. "How dare you?" Axaroth, too, fell to the sides as a fountain of silver blood splurged out. He was still very much alive due to his strength, but his danger level had considerably decreased. Just as it seemed they might gain the upper hand, two more Alliance leaders arrived, their presence as intimidating as Axaroth's. One, a towering figure with skin like molten metal, wielded a blade that crackled with electric energy. The other, a slender alien with eyes that glowed like burning coals, commanded an aura of immense psychic power. "We're not finished yet," Endrick gasped, blood trickling from his mouth as he struggled to his feet. But it was too late. The combined might of the three Alliance leaders overwhelmed them. Eldris was impaled through the shoulder by the electric blade, his scream of pain cutting through the air. Endrick, trying to protect him, was caught by a psychic blast that shattered his left leg, leaving him crumpled on the ground. Falco, blinded and bleeding, was finally subdued by a crushing blow that knocked him unconscious. His energy depleted, was the last to fall. He fought valiantly, using every ounce of his strength to create vortexes and teleport around the room. But Axaroth's speed, and the combined efforts of the other leaders proved too much. EE was struck down by a powerful psychic wave, his body crashing to the floor, barely conscious. "Secure them," Axeroff commanded, his voice cold and unyielding. The Alliance Corps moved in, binding the battered and broken group with energy restraints. As they were dragged away, the last thing they saw was the grim satisfaction on Axeroff's face. "You thought you could challenge the Alliance? Pathetic." The facility returned to a tense silence, the aftermath of the battle a stark reminder of the power they faced. The Alliance leaders watched as their prisoners were taken to the holding cells, knowing that this was only the beginning of their ordeal. "This isn't working," EE shouted. "We need a new plan." The leader advanced, his energy growing more intense with each step. "It's over. Surrender now, and I might spare your lives." Endrick glanced at his friends, knowing they were running out of options. "We can't give up. There has to be a way." Just as the leader prepared to deliver a final, devastating blow, Endrick remembered something. "Falco, Eldris, remember what we learned during training. Combine our attacks." Falco, despite his injuries, nodded. "Let's do it." Eldris, his eyes glowing brighter than ever, focused his energy. "On my mark. 1, 2, 3. The three of them unleashed their powers simultaneously. Endrick's telekinesis, Falco's dark energy, and Eldris' light manipulation merged into a single, powerful blast aimed directly at the leader. The combined attack struck the leader's shield, and for a moment it held firm. But then cracks began to appear, and the shield shattered under the pressure. The leader staggered back, momentarily stunned. EE seized the opportunity, opening a vortex directly beneath the leader. "Go." The leader fell through the vortex, and EE quickly closed it, transporting the leader to a distant, uninhabited part of the facility. "That won't hold him for long, but it should buy us some time." They hurried towards their spacecraft, their movements fueled by adrenaline and determination. The alarms were still blaring, and they knew more enemies would be on their tails soon. As they approached their ship, they encountered another group of guards, but this time, their resolve was unshakable. Endrick used his telekinesis to clear a path. Falco covered their rear with dark energy blasts, and Eldris used his light manipulation to create barriers and disorient their attackers. EE reached the ship first, opening the hatch and ushering everyone inside. "Come on, let's get out of here." They piled into the spacecraft, and EE took the controls, lifting off just as more guards arrived. The ship shot out of the hangar, dodging energy blasts and weaving through the facility's defenses. "We're not out of the woods yet," Endrick said, glancing at the sensors. "We need to get clear of the facility's range." EE nodded, his focus intense, working on it as they soared through space. The facility's defenses continued to target them, but EE's skillful piloting kept them just ahead of the attacks. Finally, they broke free of the facility's range and entered hyperspace, leaving their pursuers behind. They collapsed into their seats, exhausted but relieved. "We did it," Eldris said, a faint smile on his face. Endrick nodded. "Yeah, but we can't rest yet. We still need to figure out our next move." Falco leaned back, his expression serious. "We have Ria's location now. We need to regroup and come up with a new plan to rescue him." EE glanced at the navigation controls, setting a course for a safe rendezvous point. "First things first, let's find a place to lay low and recover. Then we can figure out our next steps." As the ship hurtled through hyperspace, they knew their mission was far from over. But they had each other, and that gave them the strength to keep fighting. "SSS, and I'll gather some supplies for your journey," Uncle Bila added. "I need to find a way to send a message." "An intergalactic message," Gustav requested. Days had passed since the warp demolator's appearance and subsequent disappearance, leaving Eldris, Endrick, Falco, and Ria adrift in uncertainty. They had been scouring the coordinates and searching for any trace of Gustav, their efforts fruitless and their morale dwindling. As they prepared to set a course for a nearby planet in hopes of finding assistance, the console beeped loudly, signaling an incoming transmission that immediately drew their attention. Falco, who was closest to the console, quickly tapped to accept the transmission. The familiar face of Gustav appeared in full vibrancy. Hey, guys. The group exchanged looks of relief mixed with confusion upon his appearance. Rival, we've searched everywhere. Where did you vanish to? Rhea was the first to yell out. I'm on Earth, Gustav revealed. You're on Earth. How did you end up there? Falco voiced in shock. It's Stark's doing. It's a long story. I'll fill you in later. But I'm all right. We thought we lost you. How are you going to get back? Eldris inquired. I'm not coming back just yet. I'm actually about to head to Miss Amy's planet, Agon. This revelation prompted a round of surprised murmurs among the group. Miss Amy's planet? Why? Endrick voiced in bafflement. It's related to something called the NID, an artifact that pointed me to Agon. I think it's crucial for what comes next. Since I missed the warp demolator's appearance, this might be the only way I get to planet Humbad. The group listened intently as Gustav briefly explained his encounter with the NID and its mysterious guidance. So, what do you need us to do now? Head to the Milky Way to join you? Eldris inquired. No, that won't be necessary. You're over a month away, and I can't have you trailing behind that long. Instead, I need you to fix up my ship. I believe by the time you're heading back, I would have gotten what I need. Okay, we could help with other things while you do what needs to be done, Endrick answered with a nod. Thanks. I'll keep you posted on my progress and what I find out on Agon. As the transmission faded, the crew sat back, processing the flurry of information. Gustav was safe, but the journey ahead was his alone to tread for now. They turned their attention to the task at hand, repairing Gustav's spacecraft and finding their way back without mishaps. We're going to head for Earth afterwards, right? Rhea asked. You bet we are. Gustav and Stark stood in the dimly lit hangar, their spacecraft prepped and ready for departure. The air thrummed with the low rumble of the engines warming up, a subtle vibration underfoot that spoke of the power at their disposal. Beside them, two bodyguards in silver robes, their features obscured by the high collars and hoods, stood silent and alert. Gustav, checking over his own disguise, a similar silver robe that masked his identity, nodded to Stark. It's time to go. Although Gustav didn't shapeshift due to the numbers seeing Stark off, he wouldn't shy out of it when the time came. Stark, adjusting his own gear, looked at Gustav with a mix of excitement and apprehension. What should I expect out there? Gustav, it's not every day one travels to a planet crafted by a goddess. Honestly, it's hard to say what we'll find. Miss Amy is unpredictable, but if there's one thing I'm sure of, it's that she's continued creating life. She aims to craft a world far different from Earth's, full of diversity and harmony. Gustav responded with a reminiscent look. As they boarded the spacecraft, the bodyguards took their positions at the controls, and Gustav settled next to Stark. The bay doors slowly retracted. With a smooth surge of power, the spacecraft lifted off, leaving Earth's atmosphere in a streak of light. As they ascended, Gustav's mind drifted to his past interactions with Miss Amy. He remembered the lush landscape she had shown him, teeming with life, creatures of her own design, each species more fascinating than the last. Miss Amy stood before a sprawling vista, her hand sweeping over a field dotted with two-headed creatures grazing under a colorful sky. Here, she had said, I will create a sanctuary where all the life forms I create can coexist in balance, a model of what any world could be, free from strife and inequality. Gustav felt a pang of nostalgia and a deep-seated curiosity about how much her world had evolved since his last visit. He pulled himself back to the present as their ship broke free from Earth's gravitational pull and entered the open cosmos. "Space travel still amazes me every time," Stark mumbled while peering forward. With his eyes, he could see every nook and cranny of the exterior of the spacecraft. "How far until we reach Agon?" Gustav questioned. "We're looking at just over a day's journey with the current hyperdrive settings since Agon is situated at the edge of the Milky Way," Stark answered informatively. The journey through space was smooth, with a vast starlit void offering a display of serene beauty. Stark occasionally attempted to draw out more stories from Gustav, who remained somewhat reticent, lost in his thoughts. "You really respect her, don't you? Miss Amy, I mean, more than respect, Stark, I owe her my life. I was hoping I wouldn't need her help anymore until all this was over, but I guess there is no other way," Gustav voiced with a look of admiration and perturbation. As they neared Agon, the planet's image began to fill the viewport, a colossal world, its surface swirling with vibrant colors and cloud patterns that hinted at its dynamic atmosphere. "There it is, Agon," Gustav announced. "Wow, it truly is 4 times the size of Earth. Very breathtaking. To think one being could create all this, it's beyond what I thought possible." Stark couldn't imagine just how powerful Miss Amy was. Although he had very much witnessed her might at ISOP, it was an entirely different scenario to physically be in the presence of an orbital body she created. The spacecraft's approach was carefully calculated as they prepared for descent. As their spacecraft approached the vibrant, swirling atmosphere of Agon, Gustav and Stark were suddenly jolted by an unexpected resistance. A shimmering barrier, invisible until now, materialized just as their ship was about to enter the planet's orbit. Stark, startled by the sudden halt, looked over at Gustav with concern. "What's happening? Why can't we move forward?" Gustav, brow furrowed in confusion and surprise, responded, This wasn't here before. Miss Amy must have later put this in place to prevent external entry. But she should be aware of my presence by now. Why isn't she taking the barrier down?" Gustav wondered out loud. It was impossible for anything to pass Miss Amy by since she became a goddess, so Gustav expected her to have sensed their spacecraft long before it got to this point. Trying to understand the situation, Gustav instructed the ship's AI to attempt a gentle push forward, but the barrier remained impassive, its surface repelling every advance with increasing force. "Let's not force it. We might damage the ship, or worse, trigger a countermeasure we're not prepared for." Uncle Bila watched in amazement as Gustav interacted with the newly revived NID. The artifact, long dormant and silent within the depths of the Vertigan vaults, now pulsed with a vibrant, mystical energy. "Mr. Crimson, to use Teach, don't worry, I understand how it works." Gustav cut Uncle Bilo off. He proceeded to place his palm flat against the NID, and the device responded immediately, its surface shimmering with an ethereal glow. The rhythmic pulsing seemed to sync with Gustav's own energy, creating a resonance that filled the room with a palpable sense of anticipation. Gustav's thoughts were singular. "I need to find a way to get to the remnants of planet Humbad." He held on to this intention, willing the NID to provide a path forward. After a tense few moments, the artifact responded. A projection of shimmering letters floated in the air before them. "Planet Agon." Asterisk, asterisk, Gustav stepped back, his surprise evident. "Agon? That's the name Miss Amy calls her planet." The room fell silent as the NID powered down, its task seemingly complete. Uncle Bila, breaking the silence, confirmed what the machine had implied. "It seems that whatever you need, Gustav, is tied to planet Agon. According to our ancestors, the NID has never been wrong." Gustav, puzzled, murmured to himself, "But why there? What could possibly be on Miss Amy's planet that relates to Humbad or the Warp Demolator?" Miss Amy's planet was still a very new one, so it didn't make any sense to him. Stark chimed in. Remember, Miss Amy isn't just your former master. She's a creator of worlds, a manipulator of cosmic scales. There is every possibility that she has foresight of the current predicament. The idea resonated with Gustav, but he was still skeptical about it. You might be right. I guess the only way to find out is by heading there. I'll arrange for transport, Stark voiced in response. Chapter 1509 Your Past. Chapter 1509 Your Past. Author's Note. Do not unlock second question. What is the future of Agon under its creator's vision? Gragoroth the Path Keeper voiced once more. Gustav instantly recalled his moments of recollection within the spacecraft on their way here. This was something Miss Amy had personally told him. He was starting to believe more and more that she really didn't want anyone visiting besides himself. Miss Amy envisions Agon as a model of a world governed by principles of equality, the equality that other civilizations fail to adopt, Gustav answered with a tone of certainty. The creature's blazing eyes seemed to flicker, perhaps in approval, as it moved on to the third question. Third question. What is the one secret shared by master and disciple that our creator warned Gustav never to reveal to anyone? Now Gustav was sure that he was right. He let out a little chuckle upon hearing this. Stark stared at him in bewilderment. You do know the answer, right? Of course. I'm just a little surprised, Gustav voiced in response before turning to face Gragoroth the Path Keeper once more. My ability to steal bloodlines and make them my own, Gustav answered. Stark's eyes nearly popped out of their sockets upon hearing this. What? Gragoroth the Path Keeper slowly withdrew its sword from the ground, the platform fading away as it considered their responses. Your answers are accepted. You may pass, he stated. Stark was still in awe, but this pretty much proved that it was accurate. Questions ran through his mind, but at the moment they needed to head forward. As the barrier dissolved, Gustav and Stark exchanged a look of relief and curiosity. They proceeded through the opening, each step taking them deeper into the heart of Agon and closer to the answers they sought. Gustav and Stark descended through the teal skies of Agon, their path illuminated by ethereal clouds that shimmered with a heavenly glow. The air was crisp and invigorating, filled with the sense of unfamiliar flora. As they ventured deeper, the landscape revealed its unique beauty. Rolling hills dotted with vibrant, alien flowers and towering structures that blended organic curves with crystalline sharpness, unlike anything on Earth. Stark, taking in the breathtaking views, commented, "This place, it's like stepping into a painting. Every corner is a masterpiece. Miss Amy didn't just create a world, she crafted a living artwork. But it's changed since I was last here. More alive," Gustav intoned. As they neared the structure that Gragoroth the Pathkeeper had directed them toward, a magnificent temple emerged from the horizon, its spires piercing the clouds. Its architecture was a harmonious blend of ancient earthly designs and otherworldly aesthetics, with walls made of a luminescent stone that seemed to pulse gently with internal light. The area around the temple buzzed with activity. Beings clad in flowing, white garments moved about their daily routines. These creatures had an ethereal quality, their movements graceful and fluid, exuding an aura of peace and purpose. Upon seeing Gustav and Stark, the creatures paused, their luminous eyes wide with curiosity. However, they maintained a respectful distance, whispering amongst themselves in a melodious language that filled the air with its lilting cadence. As Gustav and Stark approached the temple, the crowd parted naturally, creating a pathway for them. The air was filled with a resonant hum, possibly from the temple itself, which vibrated with a powerful energy. Stark, looking at the parting crowd, asked Gustav, "Do you think Miss Amy is inside? Will she know we're here?" "I can't be certain," I don't sense her presence, but she's also very much powerful than I am, so it's possible that she can escape my perception, Gustav analyzed with a disturbed look. One thing for sure was that things were different. Miss Amy would be aware of his own presence and revealed herself, so something didn't seem right. Just then, a figure approached them. This being was taller than the others, with skin that shimmered like moonlight and eyes that reflected the stars of the night sky. Its robes were adorned with symbols that glowed faintly, tracing the contours of ancient celestial maps. Welcome to Agon, travelers. I am Salethiel, guardian of the Amy Temple. We sensed your arrival through the Song of the Spires. What brings you to this sacred place? Author's note. Please check out my new story, Evo's Legacy. Rise of the Strongest System Bearer. Support me by adding it to your library and reading. Thank you all. Let's not force it. We might damage the ship, or worse, trigger a countermeasure we're not prepared for. Gustav instructed with a bothersome expression. Can we find a way around it? Stark questioned. I'm not sure. There's a high chance it surrounds the entire planet. Gustav paused, considering their options. This is no ordinary barrier, as Gustav delved deeper into his examination. Stark monitored the energy readings, noting a peculiar pattern. Gustav, it looks like the closer we get to the barrier, the more our ship systems are drained. Our energy levels are dropping. Gustav, pulling back from his focused state, nodded slowly. You're right. It's not just a physical barrier. It doesn't seem to allow any type of matter through. Knowing how powerful Miss Amy was, Gustav was very well aware that whatever he threw at the barrier wouldn't matter. She was able to keep even the third strongest alpha out. What's our next move then? How do we get through? Stark inquired. He'll use God Eyes to scan the barrier and the planet, Gustav voiced in response. God Eyes has been activated. Activating his God Eyes, Gustav's vision expanded, piercing through the veil to analyze the barrier structure and the planet's surface. His eyes glowed with an intense light as streams of complex data flowed into his mind. As he scrutinized the terrain, a particular anomaly caught his attention, a subtle, unnatural opening on the far side of the planet. Stark, look there. He pointed towards the coordinates displayed on the ship's navigation screen. There's an opening on this side of the planet. An opening? That's peculiar. Stark was just as befuddled as him. Why would there be a barrier covering up almost the entirety of the planet, except for one spot? They adjusted their course, heading towards the indicated location. The journey was brief, and soon they hovered above the opening, which was indeed too small for their spacecraft to pass through. It's smaller than I expected. Looks like we're going on a little excursion. Then, Stark said to Gustav, Family head, it's not advisable for you to go without proper backup, one of his bodyguards voiced in defiance. I appreciate your concern, but Gustav is more than capable of handling any threats. We'll be fine. Despite the bodyguard's protests, Stark reassured them of their safety due to Gustav's formidable power. As Gustav and Stark approached the opening while flying, a brilliant beam of light suddenly materialized in front of them. The light morphed into a majestic creature adorned with a shimmering cape and conjoined silver horns that arched gracefully back from its head. The creature was imposing, standing about 9 feet tall with eyes that blazed like twin suns. It carried a 7-foot-long sword, which it stabbed into the ground on a newly formed platform beneath its feet. I am Gragoroth the Pathkeeper. Entry is unallowed without correctly answering 3 of my questions, the creature voiced with an imposing tone. Stark looked to Gustav, uncertain of their next move. Should we try to answer, or do you want to take a more direct approach? He asked. Gustav observed the creature carefully, noting the familiar essence that emanated from it, a signature that he recognized as Miss Amy's. This being is infused with Miss Amy's essence, and it possesses a power greater than my own, no doubt one of Miss Amy's creation. We should comply with its demands. Reluctantly, Stark nodded, turning back to the creature with a cautious stance. We will answer your questions. Proceed. First question, what binds the realms of Agon and Earth? Graggoroth the Pathkeeper voiced. Gustav pondered for a moment before answering, Miss Amy herself being originally someone from Earth. Incorrect, Graggoroth the Pathkeeper responded. You have one more try before you are forever denied entry into Agon. Stark's eyes narrowed in suspicion, since he also believed this would be the correct answer. Gustav was a bit taken aback, but his mind raced with different possibilities. It's not related to abilities. I'd say being at the edge of the Milky was, but that's not it either, since the sun is outside of it. So perhaps in this case, it's a case of personal bond. Gustav stared at Graggoroth once more before spitting out another answer. Master-student relationship? Correct. Our creator is only bound by her affection for her only pupil, Gustav Crimson. Graggoroth answered with a tone of reverence. Oh, we got it. Stark jubilated. 2 more questions, human, Graggoroth reminded him. Gustav decided to play the disciple card. I am actually Gustav Crimson. So can you just let us through? You shall not pass until all 3 questions are accurately answered, Graggoroth stated with a strong tone. He is saying the truth, though, Stark chimed in from the side. You shall not pass until all 3 questions are accurately answered, Graggoroth repeated his earlier statement. I'm guessing this is a preventive measure against any form of deceit, which might mean Miss Amy doesn't want anyone visiting except for me, Gustav thought. Chapter 15:10 Media Interview. Chapter 15:10 Media Interview Author's Note. Unedited chapter. Angie sat in the brightly lit studio, her face calm but determined. The background behind her displayed the logo of Galactic Views, one of the most popular media outlets across the Earth. The interviewer, a well-known figure named Zara Lan, sat opposite her with a poised, inquisitive expression. Zara began with a warm, professional tone. Angie, thank you for joining us today. I understand you have a lot to say about Gustav Crimson, especially with his trial approaching. Can you tell us who he is to you? Angie nodded. Thank you for having me, Zara. First off, Gustav is a partner, a friend, and a teammate. We were both MBO cadets and even participated in ISOP together. So he is your boyfriend? Zara Lan inquired with a look of suspicion. Yes, he is. I have known him for close to 5 years now, Angie responded. Can you tell us why you believe Gustav is innocent? Zara proceeded to ask. It's not that I believe he is innocent. He is innocent. There is no belief or disbelief. I want to clarify that Gustav is not guilty of the crimes he's been accused of. I've been with him on many occasions where he's risked his life to save others. He is painted as a villain because the world wants someone to blame, but I know the truth. Gustav has saved countless lives, and he's being wrongfully accused. Zara leaned forward, her eyes narrowing slightly. But Angie, there are reports that Gustav was responsible for the destruction of planet Ozius. How do you explain that? Angie took a deep breath. I was there. Gustav did not destroy planet Ozius. In fact, he saved as many people as he could from that disaster. The destruction was caused by external forces, and Gustav was wrongly blamed for it. Zara's expression hardened. Yet, the evidence suggests otherwise. The beings responsible for the destruction came in search of him. They seem to bear some history. Or are you saying all the witnesses and reports are fabricated? Angie didn't waver. Yes, they are. The real witnesses, those who were truly there, know the truth. Just because he was a target doesn't make him responsible. That's like blaming a victim for a crime. The interviewer's face twitched with a hint of annoyance. Well, Angie, what about the allegations that Gustav was involved with the Gustavo Alliance? Reports say he led several attacks on peaceful planets. Angie's eyes flashed with anger. Gustav was never part of the Gustavo alliance. He has never been seen with them. They go around causing havoc in his name, but never has he guided their actions. If I go ahead to commit a crime and claim that you were the mastermind without any form of proof, should you be the one on trial instead of me? Zara's lips curled into a sly smile, and yet here you are defending a man who has been labeled as a universal fugitive. Some might say you are blinded by loyalty or perhaps something more. Angie clenched her fists. I am not blinded. I know Gustav's true character. He puts up cold and uncaring fonts, but perpetrating acts of evil is not something he would do. He saved my life more times than I can count. I stand by him because I know he is innocent. Zara's tone became more provocative. There are claims that Gustav attacked the children of planet Zephyr. What do you say to that? Angie's face hardened. That is a blatant lie. Gustav would never harm children. In fact, there happen to be claims that he saved thousands of abducted alien children from traffickers. Why does the media only focus on negative hearsays but never the positives? The live stream of the interview was buzzing with comments. The online audience was divided, with many hurling insults at Gustav and Angie. She's delusional. Gustav is a monster. One comment read, Angie is just as guilty as he is. Lock them both up. Another exclaimed. Zara, sensing the tension, pushed further. So, you claim that all these witnesses and reports are false. Do you have any proof to support your statements? Angie stared directly into the camera. I am the proof. My presence right here is proof, because if he hadn't rescued me, it would have caused great catastrophe. The only reason he got caught is because he chose to rescue me regardless of the consequences. And you all were also saved in the process. Zara smirked, and yet you have no tangible evidence to show us. Isn't it convenient? Angie's patience was wearing thin. The truth doesn't always come with a convenient package. Zara. Sometimes it's buried under lies and deceit. Jack, the world's strongest, was there with me on that day. He will testify in Gustav's favor. Zara leaned back, satisfied with her provocation. Well, Angie, we will see what the trial reveals. Thank you for your time. As the interview ended, the stream of comments continued to flood in. The internet was ablaze with debates and continuous insults. One thing that controlled the minds of people the most was fear. People always fear what they do not understand. Ever since it was determined that Gustav could use multiple bloodlines, he became a confirmed threat. He had a potential that had never been seen before. And if it couldn't be controlled, people would rather see it get extinguished. In a dimly lit conference room within the high-security ICE facility where Gustav was being kept, a group of scientists gathered around a large metallic table. The flickering of the lights overhead and the soft beeps of the various monitoring devices created an eerie overlay to their clandestine meeting. Each scientist had a look of anticipation and sinister excitement etched across their faces. Dr. Harlow, a tall, gaunt man with sharp features and piercing blue eyes, leaned forward, his voice barely containing his glee. I can't believe we finally have him. After all these years, Gustav Crimson is within our grasp. Dr. Celine, a petite woman with a severe bun and glasses perched on the edge of her nose, nodded fervently. Indeed, the possibilities are endless. I've been waiting for this opportunity since he revealed his multiple bloodlines during ISOP. Dr. Langston, a burly man with a gruff voice and a perpetual scowl, grinned. I've always wondered what makes him tick. Imagine the advancements we could achieve by studying his anatomy. I, for one, would love to cut him open and see what secrets lie within. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, with nods and dark smiles exchanged among the scientists. Dr. Langston's eyes gleamed with a sadistic curiosity. Dr. Vega, a middle-aged-looking woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a mane of curly hair, crossed her arms and smirked. Jack might be a hindrance, but let's not forget that the world government itself wants to know Gustav's secret. They won't stand in our way. They're just as eager as we are. Dr. Harlow's eyes narrowed. You're right, Vega. Once the trial concludes and Gustav is proclaimed guilty, we'll have free rein. The authorities will give us full control, and we can finally unlock the mysteries of his unique genetic makeup. Dr. O'Malley, a lanky man with an almost skeletal appearance and deep-set eyes, chuckled darkly. Just imagine turning Gustav into a weapon, or better yet, using his secrets to create an entire battalion of mixed-blood soldiers with powers like his. We could have the most powerful army in the universe at our disposal. Dr. Celine tapped her pen against the table, her eyes alight with excitement. We could revolutionize warfare, medicine, and science. The things we could learn from him, it boggles the mind. Dr. Langston leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his broad chest. But we need to be careful. Jack seems to be on his side. We are all aware that he is powerful and has influence. Dr. Harlow waved a dismissive hand. Jack won't be an issue. As long as we have the backing of the world government, he won't be able to interfere. He does love to follow commands, after all. Besides, the public is clamoring for Gustav's downfall. They'll support whatever we decide to do with him. Dr. Vega's smile widened. I say we start making preparations now. Once the trial is over, we should be ready to move immediately. We can't waste any time. Dr. Harlow's eyes gleamed with anticipation. Agreed. Meanwhile, in a nearby cell, Gustav's unconscious body lay restrained. The scientists believed he was unaware of the dark plans being concocted. His consciousness, which floated in a void of darkness, took in the occurrences of everything ongoing in his surroundings. How interesting. Greed will lead to the downfall of this universe. Gustav's consciousness shook his head softly in disappointment. It wasn't that he didn't expect this. Instead, he hoped they would prove him wrong, but unfortunately they didn't. Preparations are nearly complete, Gustav mumbled while peering at a particular direction within this void. Chapter 15:11 Back to Earth. Chapter 15:11 Back to Earth. Author's note. Unedited chapter within the void of his consciousness. Gustav's thoughts raced. He had absorbed everything the scientists had said, their sinister plans unfolding like a twisted opera around him. He knew he needed to act, but his current state left him with few options. At the far end of the dark void, a golden glow pulsed gently. Preparations will be complete soon, Gustav's consciousness voiced within the void. Meanwhile, within the Alliance's headquarters, a storm was brewing. In a grand chamber filled with towering holographic screens and advanced communication devices, several Alliance leaders gathered. Their faces were tense, and their voices echoed with urgency and concern. We need to address the Gustav trial situation, said Zyra, a tall, statuesque figure with skin that shimmered like mercury and eyes that glowed an unsettling shade of green. Earth is planning to host the trial, but we cannot allow them to control the narrative, Kafuka added with a tone of distraught. Perhaps we should threaten Earth into handing over Gustav, suggested Lorne, an alien with elongated features and eyes that burned with an inner fire. His suggestion hung in the air like a fruit waiting to be plucked. Zyra narrowed her eyes. Earth is one of the Alliance leaders. Such a move could fracture our unity and lead to open conflict. We need a more nuanced approach. A report flashed onto one of the holographic screens, catching everyone's attention. The image showed Axaroth, one of their own, lying unconscious in space outside the Alliance's territory. Axaroth was spotted passed out in space, reported an attendant, her voice tinged with disbelief. His injuries are severe. It appears he engaged in a significant battle. The leaders exchanged glances, their concern deepening. If Axaroth was defeated, that means those kids successfully escaped. All our plans were for nothing. Kafuka growled lightly in dissatisfaction. Let him get medical care. Zyra said firmly. But first, we must deal with the immediate threat. We cannot let Earth's trial overshadow our authority. We need to send a delegation to Earth, Lorne suggested. A show of strength and unity. We can pressure them without outright threats during the trial. Kafuka nodded in agreement. We should include representatives from planets that have grievances against Gustav. Their voices will add weight to our demands. Zyra considered this with a thought gaze from her multiple eyes. Very well, we will prepare a delegation. As the plans were laid, Gustav continued to prepare. He knew the trial was drawing near despite not being informed. It was the first time a trial would be held while the suspect was unconscious. Unfortunately, the world leaders didn't seem to care about his rights. In the Alliance, the leaders present finalized their plans. They would visit Earth, using both diplomatic pressure and the threat of force to sway the trial's outcome. The delegation was chosen, and preparations began in earnest. On an isolated, barren orbital body, many light years away from the Alliance's main territory, a group was gathered. The celestial landscape around them was pale silver with jagged rocks and sparse vegetation under the dim light of distant stars. Jack stood apart from them, his expression inscrutable. "I don't want to head back to Earth," Falco said in frustration. His damaged eyes still burned with resolve. "We haven't saved Rhea yet. We can't just abandon him." Endrick, sitting on a jagged rock, shook his head. "Falco, we barely managed to escape with our lives. We need to regroup and rethink our strategy. Charging back into danger isn't going to help Rhea." Eldris and EE stood silently, caught between the two strong arguments. EE finally broke the silence. "I understand both your points, but we can't ignore the fact that Rhea's capture was intended to lure Gustav out. Once Gustav learns of it, he will come charging in, and I don't think we want him falling into a trap." Jack's deep voice suddenly cut through the tension. "Listen, the only reason I knew where to find you and managed to save you was because of Gustav." All four immediately turned to him with expressions of shock and curiosity. Jack continued, "Gustav visited Earth and saved Angie. He seemed to already know that you would be in trouble and tried to get me to stop you for. He's currently unconscious and in captivity on Earth." A heavy silence followed as the group processed the information. Falco's aggressive demeanor faltered. "Gustav is back? Wasn't he supposed to be at Agon?" EE turned to face Endrick with a look of confusion. Jack nodded. "Yes, he is back, and he's about to undergo trial because he is now in MBO custody. The entire Earth is already preparing for this trial." EE held his chin with a disturbed look. "I've compiled testimonials and proofs of Gustav's deeds over the past year. I can't miss the trial. We need to be there to support him and make sure he doesn't lose." Eldris finally chimed in. Then it settled. "We head back to Earth. If we can clear Gustav's name, Rhea will be freed, and we can turn the tide in our favor." Falco clenched his fists but nodded in agreement. "All right, then let's do it." Jack, satisfied with their decision, began to gather energy around him as 8 star-shaped constructs glowed in the surroundings. "You kids might be able to kill 2 birds with 1 stone." The constructs merged and enveloped them. Soon the surroundings of the barren orbital body dissolved into a swirl of light and energy. Swoohoo, within moments, they were transported back to Earth, landing just outside the perimeter of Plankton City. The familiar sights and sounds of their home planet greeted them as they stepped out of the construct. The city's towering skyscrapers and bustling streets felt both comforting and surreal after their harrowing experience. Elevra stood on a star bustling with life. The sky above her a swirling display of colors and celestial bodies unlike anything seen from Earth. This place, known as Aelion, and it happened to be another melting pot of species from across the galaxies. This part of space wasn't under the control of the Alliance. Tall, shimmering buildings made of alien alloys reached towards the heavens, connected by floating platforms and transparent walkways. The air was filled with the buzz of advanced technology, interspersed with the chatter of numerous languages and dialects. The inhabitants of Aelion were just as diverse as its architecture. Beings with crystalline skin floated alongside humanoids with metallic limbs and eyes that glowed with an inner light. In the bustling markets, traders from various species bartered exotic goods, glowing fruits, shimmering fabrics, and artifacts pulsating with unknown energy. Creatures with multiple appendages scuttled about, their eyes reflecting the vivid lights of the city. Elevera, blending in with a simple yet elegant disguise, had been on this star for several days, tirelessly seeking any information about the Gustavo Alliance. Her initial inquiries had met with dead ends and wary glances. The shadowy organization proved elusive as ever. "This is getting me nowhere," Elevera muttered to herself as she navigated through the crowded marketplace. She had been subtly altering her narrative, now presenting herself as someone eager to join the Gustavo Alliance, hoping this might finally yield results. Her perseverance eventually paid off. While seated at a small, out-of-the-way cantina, sipping on a drink that glowed with an inky pink hue, she was approached by a figure cloaked in shadows. The figure moved with an eerie grace, but their face was obscured by a hood. "I hear you're looking to join the Gustavo Alliance," the figure said, their voice a low, smooth whisper that sent chills across the surroundings. Elevera nodded while her eyes narrowed as she tried to pierce the shadows hiding the figure's face. "Yes, I want to be part of something bigger, to serve a cause greater than myself." The figure laughed softly, a sound that seemed to echo around the small cantina. "The Gustavo Alliance is not something you join on a whim. You have to be chosen." Elevera leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Then tell me what I need to do to be chosen." The figure seemed to study her for a long moment before replying, "Prove your faith and loyalty to our God, Gustav." Elevera scoffed internally. They really thought of Gustav as their god, so she had to pick her next move carefully. "And how do I do that?" she asked with a calm voice. The figure's eyes glinted from within the hood. "That is for you to figure out. One cannot be chosen if they don't know our God well enough to prove their loyalty. Only the truly devoted can gain our trust." As the figure turned to leave, Elevera reached out. "Wait, can you at least point me in the right direction?" The figure paused, considering her request. "Our God intends to cleanse the universe. Do something related even if it is a very tiny fraction, and perhaps you'll catch our attention." With that, the figure vanished into the crowd, leaving Elevera alone with her thoughts. Chapter 15:12, Joining the Gustavo Alliance. Chapter 15:12, Joining the Gustavo Alliance. Author's note. Unedited chapter. It would have taken me nothing to capture him, but it may scare them off. "I can't risk it," Elevera thought internally. It seemed like the Gustavo Alliance carefully planned their actions, so she couldn't make brash moves that might cost the whole operation. She needed to get proof that Gustav wasn't running the Gustavo Alliance as quickly as she could, but now it was looking like her morals were about to be tested. One thing she knew now for sure was that they had their eyes on her. Her next move would be what determined things. Elevera spent the next few days meticulously planning her next move. She knew that to truly prove herself to the Gustavo Alliance, she had to take decisive and visible action. She decided her target, a nearby planet known as Zorath, inhabited by a relatively peaceful species. Zorath was a planet with a harsh, rocky landscape dotted with craggy mountains and deep valleys. Its inhabitants, the Zorathians, were a hardy, reptilian race with scales that shimmered in the sunlight. Their cities were built into the sides of mountains, blending seamlessly with the natural environment. Despite their resilient nature, the Zorathians had never developed strong centralized governance. making them an easy target for a powerful invader. Upon arriving on Zoreth, Elevra wasted no time in making her intentions clear. She stood at the center of the largest city, her voice amplified by her bloodline, echoing through the valleys and canyons. I am Vora, and I come in the name of Gustav, the god of the Gustavo Alliance. From this moment on, Zoreth belongs to us. The Zorathians, who had gathered around in curiosity, now looked at her with a mixture of fear and defiance. Their leader, a towering figure named Grat-Hack with scales as dark as night, stepped forward from his abode. We do not bow to outsiders, he hissed with a deep rumble that resonated through the crowd. The purple eye on Elevra's forehead began to glow with an intense light, and a pulse of energy emanated from her, causing the ground to tremble. You will bow, she declared with a tone of unyielding authority. Grat-Hack lunged at her with surprising speed, his claws extended and teeth bared. But Elevra was faster. With a flick of her wrist, she unleashed a torrent of energy that sent Grat-Hack crashing into a nearby cliff. Before he could recover, she was upon him, her hand glowing with purple energy. She placed it on his chest, and he writhed in agony trying to free himself to no avail. Elevra proceeded to turn around and fire a beam at a mountainous region in the distance. Boom! The beam tore through multiple mountains, leaving building-sized holes in them, and continued shooting forward with intensity. The crowd gasped and murmured among themselves as they witnessed this in accordance with their leader's defeat. Surrender, Elevra proclaimed as her voice cut through the murmurs. Serve Gustav. Defy the Gustavo Alliance and face a fate worse than death. One by one, the Zorathians bowed to her, their heads lowered in submission. Just as she secured dominance, several figures materialized from the shadows. They were members of the Gustavo Alliance, who had been secretly observing her actions just as she suspected. The leader of the group was an overbearing figure with dark skin covered in glowing tattoos. He introduced himself as Val Theron, one of the captains of the Gustavo Alliance. Val Theron's eyes gleamed with approval. You have proven yourself, Vora. Your demonstration of power and decisiveness is exactly what we seek in our members. Welcome to the Gustavo Alliance. Elevra bowed her head slightly, acknowledging the compliment. Thank you, Val Theron. Val Theron nodded. Before we leave for the initiation, we will leave one of our own to oversee the transition of Zoreth. Tormac stepped forward. A hulking figure, nearly 7 feet tall with rippling muscles and skin that shimmered like polished stone, approached. His eyes glowed with a fiery intensity, and he carried an enormous battle axe on his back. I will ensure that Zoreth remains under our control, Tormac rumbled, his voice deep and resonant. Val Theron gestured for Elevra to follow. Come, Vora, your initiation awaits. As they prepared to leave, Elevra couldn't help but feel a chime of satisfaction. She had taken a significant step in infiltrating the Gustavo Alliance, and now she was about to become one of them. Val Theron and the others guided Elevra back to the star, where she had originally sought to join the Gustavo Alliance. They arrived at a secluded area on the planet, surrounded by transparent silver-like rocks. Val Theron approached an irregular-looking rock formation and placed his hand on its surface. A series of symbols glowed under his touch, and with a low rumble, the rock split to reveal a hidden entrance. This way, Val Theron instructed, leading Elevra and the others down a narrow, winding staircase that descended deep into the heart of the star. The passage was dimly lit by bioluminescent fungi that cast an eerie glow on the rough-hewn walls. As they reached the bottom, Elevra found herself in a vast underground cavern filled with advanced technology and bustling with activity. The base was a hive of Gustavo Alliance operatives, each going about different tasks. The air was filled with a burst of conversation in various alien languages, mixed with low vibrations of technological compartments. Val Theron turned to Elevra. This is base number 7. Your initiation will take place here, and we will verify your backgrounds to ensure you are not a threat to us. Elevra nodded, her expression calm and collected. Understood. They led her to a chamber at the far end of the cavern, where a group of high-ranking Gustavo Alliance members awaited. The chamber was adorned with symbols of the Alliance, and a large, circular platform stood in the center. Val Theron gestured for Elevra to step onto the platform. Place your hand on the scanner, he instructed. Elevra did, as she was told, and a beam of light scanned her from head to toe. The platform whirred as it processed the data. Thanks to EES' meticulous precautions and the cover-up on her records, the scan found nothing suspicious. There was not a single information about Elevra being a part of a law enforcement group or anything related to her family on Earth. They had properly plotted to the point where all of that had been modified. Val Theron glanced at the readout and nodded. Your records are clean. Proceed with the initiation. Another member of the Gustavo Alliance figure with shimmering blue skin and 4 arms approached. She introduced herself as Vice Captain Lelia. I will oversee your initiation, Vora, she said, using Elevra's alias. This will involve a series of tests and the placement of a mark that will grant you access to our network. Elevra nodded again, ready for whatever lay ahead. The initiation began with a test of combat skills, where Elevra faced off against various opponents, showcasing her prowess in hand-to-hand combat and her mastery of her bloodline abilities. Next came a series of mental challenges designed to test her strategic thinking and loyalty to the Gustavo Alliance's cause. After a few tests, which Elevra scaled perfectly, Lelia deemed her worthy. She brought out a small, intricate device that glowed with a faint blue light. This will place an invisible tattoo on your arm, she explained. It will serve as your key to our bases and resources. Elevra extended her arm, and Talia activated the device. A slight tingling sensation spread across Elevra's skin as the tattoo was applied. When it was done, there was no visible mark, but Elevra could feel its presence. Welcome to the Gustavo Alliance, Vora, Talia said, her voice warm with approval. You are now one of us. Val Theron stepped forward, handing Elevra a small data pad. This contains information about our hierarchy, our goals, and your first assignment. You will be part of Squadron Alpha, one of our most elite units. Your task is to assist in our operations and gather intelligence. Elevra accepted the data pad. I understand. I will do my best to serve the Gustavo Alliance. As they left the chamber, Val Theron and Talia continued to brief her on the workings of the Alliance. Each squadron reports to a captain, and captains report to commanders, while each commander reports to the council. Our ultimate goal is to bring the cleansing to the universe as our Lord Gustav would, Val Theron explained. Talia added, We have many enemies and trust is hard to come by. Prove yourself and you will rise through the ranks. Elevra nodded, absorbing the information. She knew that her true mission was to gather evidence that the Gustavo Alliance was not being run by Gustav. Her infiltration had been successful, but now the real work began. Elevra moved to the area where her squad was said to group up so she could introduce herself. She was not in a rush, so she properly too in the details of her surroundings in the process. That you're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.